On a cold autumn evening in October 1981, Dr. Emily Carter, a brilliant NASA analyst specializing in satellite data interpretation, vanished without a trace from her home in Houston, Texas, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt the space agency and her family for nearly a decade. Emily, known for her groundbreaking work on classified satellite imaging technology, had been working on Project Skywatch, a top-secret program designed to monitor Soviet military installations during the height of the Cold War tensions between the superpowers. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the scientific community and sparked one of the most extensive missing person investigations in NASA's history, involving federal agencies, local law enforcement, and even international intelligence services, who feared she might have been compromised by foreign agents. Where are you reading from? Share your city and country in the comments before we continue this story. That evening, Emily was last seen leaving her office at Johnson Space Center around 9:30 p.m., carrying a briefcase containing sensitive documents that she had been reviewing for an upcoming presentation to Pentagon officials scheduled for the following week. Her colleagues described her as appearing unusually nervous and distracted during her final days at work, frequently checking over her shoulder and making cryptic comments about people watching and information that could change everything. Security cameras captured her walking to her car in the parking garage, but the footage became mysteriously corrupted after that point, with technical experts unable to recover the missing frames that might have shown what happened next. Her husband Michael, a petroleum engineer, reported her missing when she failed to return home for dinner with their 8-year-old daughter Sarah, something Emily had never done without calling first in their 12 years of marriage. The initial search revealed her car abandoned in a motel parking lot 15 miles from NASA, with her purse still inside but no signs of struggle, leading investigators to initially suspect she might have left voluntarily due to stress from her high-pressure job. However, those who knew Emily best insisted she would never abandon her family, especially her beloved daughter, and that her dedication to her work and country made the idea of defection or voluntary disappearance completely implausible. 8 years later, construction workers expanding the same motel's parking lot made a shocking discovery that would reignite the investigation and reveal the dark truth about what had really happened to one of NASA's most trusted analysts. Dr. Emily Carter's life at NASA had been marked by exceptional achievements and growing responsibilities that placed her at the center of America's most sensitive space-based intelligence operations during one of the most dangerous periods of the Cold War. Born in rural Kansas to a family of farmers, Emily had shown extraordinary aptitude for mathematics and physics from an early age, earning a full scholarship to MIT, where she completed her doctorate in aerospace engineering with a specialization in satellite technology and data analysis. Her recruitment by NASA in 1975 came after she published groundbreaking research on improving satellite image resolution, work that caught the attention of both civilian space program administrators and military intelligence officials who saw the potential applications for national security. Within 3 years, Emily had been promoted to lead analyst for Project Skywatch, a classified program that used advanced satellite technology to monitor Soviet missile installations, troop movements, and nuclear facilities, providing crucial intelligence that helped maintain the delicate balance of power during the final years of the Cold War. Her colleagues at Johnson Space Center described her as brilliant but increasingly burdened by the weight of the secrets she carried, often working 16-hour days analyzing images that revealed the true extent of Soviet military capabilities and strategic planning. In the months before her disappearance, Emily had been working on a particularly sensitive assignment involving the analysis of satellite data from the Soviet Union's Plesetsk Cosmodrome, where intelligence suggested the Soviets were developing new intercontinental ballistic missile technology that could shift the global balance of power. Her husband Michael later revealed that Emily had been receiving strange phone calls at home, conversations that she would take in private, and that left her visibly shaken, though she refused to discuss the content with him, citing national security concerns. Colleagues noticed that Emily had become increasingly paranoid about security breaches within NASA, expressing concerns that classified information was being leaked to unauthorized parties and that some of her fellow analysts might be compromised by foreign intelligence services. Her supervisor, Dr. James Morrison, would later testify that Emily had requested additional security clearance reviews for several team members and had begun keeping backup copies of her most sensitive work in a personal safe at home. Behavior that was unusual but not necessarily alarming given the high-stakes nature of their work. The pressure of her position, combined with the constant awareness that her work directly impacted national security and potentially the lives of millions of Americans, had begun to take a visible toll on Emily's health and personal relationships in the weeks leading up to her mysterious disappearance. The day of Emily's disappearance, October 15, 1981, began like any other at Johnson Space Center, but would end with events that would puzzle investigators for years and ultimately reveal a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and industry. Emily arrived at her office at 6:30 a.m. earlier than usual and immediately began reviewing satellite data from the previous night's intelligence-gathering operations, focusing particularly on images from the Plesetsk facility that showed unusual activity suggesting an imminent missile test. Her assistant, Linda Rodriguez, later recalled that Emily seemed agitated and kept checking her watch throughout the morning, as if expecting an important call or meeting that never materialized as planned. Around 10 a.m., Emily received a phone call that lasted exactly 3 minutes, after which she immediately locked her computer terminal and placed several classified documents in her personal safe, behavior that Linda found odd since Emily typically worked with such materials throughout the day. Dr. Morrison testified that Emily had requested an urgent meeting with him at 2 p.m., claiming she had discovered irregularities in the satellite data that required immediate attention from higher authorities, but she provided no details about the nature of these irregularities or why they were so concerning. During their meeting, Emily presented evidence that someone had been systematically altering satellite images before they reached final analysis, removing or modifying details that would have revealed the true extent of Soviet military capabilities and potentially compromising American intelligence assessments. She had discovered this tampering by comparing original data feeds with the processed images that were being distributed to Pentagon officials, finding discrepancies that could only have been introduced by someone with high-level access to the satellite data processing systems. Morrison was stunned by these revelations and immediately agreed to Emily's request for a meeting with NASA security officials the following morning, but insisted that she not discuss her findings with anyone else until they could determine the scope of the security breach. Emily spent the remainder of the afternoon documenting her discoveries, creating detailed reports that compared original and altered images, and preparing a presentation that would expose what appeared to be a systematic effort to mislead American intelligence agencies about Soviet military capabilities. Her final logged activity was at 8:45 p.m., when she accessed the satellite data system one last time, downloading files that she apparently intended to take home for further analysis, though these files were never found among her personal belongings. Security footage showed Emily leaving the building at 9:30 p.m., carrying her briefcase and appearing to look around nervously as she walked to her car. But the cameras mysteriously malfunctioned just as she reached the parking garage, creating a gap in the surveillance record that investigators would never be able to explain satisfactorily. The initial investigation into Emily's disappearance was hampered by jurisdictional conflicts, security concerns, and what appeared to be deliberate obstruction by certain government agencies that claimed national security interests prevented full disclosure of Emily's work and activities. Local Houston police were the first responders when Michael Carter reported his wife missing, but within hours, FBI agents had taken control of the investigation, citing Emily's security clearance and access to classified materials as justification for federal involvement. The FBI's initial approach focused on the possibility that Emily had been recruited by foreign intelligence services or had voluntarily defected, a theory that her family and colleagues vehemently rejected, but that seemed to drive much of the early investigative effort. Agents conducted extensive interviews with Emily's colleagues, family members, and friends. But many of those questioned later complained that the interviews seemed designed more to find evidence of Emily's disloyalty than to determine what had actually happened to her. The discovery of Emily's abandoned car in the Starlight Motel parking lot provided the first concrete clue, but forensic analysis revealed few useful details. No fingerprints other than Emily's own, no signs of struggle, and no indication of where she might have gone after leaving the vehicle. Motel employees were questioned extensively, but none remembered seeing Emily or anyone matching her description, and the motel's guest registry for that night showed no suspicious entries or unusual activity that might explain why her car was found there. NASA security officials conducted their own parallel investigation, focusing on Emily's claims about altered satellite data, but their findings were classified and never shared with local law enforcement or even Emily's family, creating frustration and suspicion about a potential cover-up. Dr. Morrison, Emily's supervisor, was placed on administrative leave pending a security review, and several other analysts who had worked closely with Emily were transferred to different projects, moves that colleagues interpreted as attempts to silence potential witnesses rather than legitimate security measures. The FBI's investigation expanded to include surveillance of Emily's family and friends, with agents monitoring phone calls and mail in case she attempted to make contact. But these efforts produced no useful leads and only added to the family's distress. After 6 months of intensive investigation, the FBI officially classified Emily's case as a voluntary disappearance. Despite the lack of evidence supporting this conclusion and the strong objections of her family and colleagues who insisted she would never have abandoned her responsibilities or her daughter, the case was transferred to the Missing Persons Division and gradually received less attention as other priorities took precedence, leaving Emily's family to continue their own search efforts with limited resources and growing desperation as months turned into years without any sign of their missing loved one. The years following Emily's disappearance were marked by persistent efforts by her family to keep the case active, despite official indifference and what appeared to be systematic attempts to discourage further investigation into her fate and the circumstances surrounding her vanishing. Michael Carter became a relentless advocate for his missing wife, hiring private investigators, consulting with former intelligence officials, and maintaining correspondence with journalists who had covered the case, all while trying to provide stability for their daughter Sarah, who struggled to understand why her mother had disappeared. Sarah, who had been only 8 when Emily vanished, grew up with the constant hope that her mother would return, but also with the growing awareness that something terrible had likely happened, and that powerful forces were working to prevent the truth from being revealed. Michael's private investigators uncovered evidence that Emily had been under surveillance by unknown parties in the weeks before her disappearance, with neighbors reporting seeing unfamiliar cars parked near their home and strangers asking questions about Emily's schedule and activities. The investigators also discovered that Emily had opened a safety deposit box at a downtown Houston bank just days before her disappearance. But when Michael attempted to access it, he was told that the box had been sealed by federal authorities and that its contents were classified for national security reasons. Attempts to obtain information through Freedom of Information Act requests were largely unsuccessful, with most documents heavily redacted or withheld entirely on grounds of national security, leaving the family with more questions than answers about Emily's work and the events leading to her disappearance. Michael organized annual vigils and press conferences to keep Emily's case in the public eye, attracting support from other families of missing persons and from advocacy groups concerned about government accountability and transparency in cases involving classified work. The family's efforts were supported by several former NASA employees who had worked with Emily and who believed that her disappearance was connected to her discovery of the satellite data tampering, though most were reluctant to speak publicly due to their own security clearances and concerns about retaliation. Dr. Morrison, who had been Emily's supervisor, eventually retired from NASA and began speaking more openly about the case, revealing that Emily's concerns about data manipulation had been validated by internal investigations, but that the results had been classified and the responsible parties had never been publicly identified. As the years passed, the case became a symbol for families of missing persons who believed their loved ones had been silenced for political or security reasons. And Emily's story was featured in books and documentaries about government cover-ups and the human cost of national security secrecy. Despite the passage of time and the official closure of the investigation, Michael and Sarah never stopped believing that Emily was out there somewhere, either being held against her will or having been forced to assume a new identity for her own protection, and they continued to hope that someday the truth would finally be revealed. On March 12, 1989, 8 years after Emily Carter's disappearance, construction workers expanding the parking lot of the Starlight Motel made a discovery that would shock investigators and reignite one of NASA's most troubling unsolved cases. The workers, employed by Houston Construction Company, were using heavy machinery to excavate an area behind the motel when their equipment struck something metallic buried approximately 4 feet underground, initially assuming they had hit an old septic tank or utility line. When they cleared away the dirt and debris, they uncovered the roof of a 1979 Honda Civic that matched the description of Emily's missing vehicle, perfectly preserved in the clay soil that had protected it from the elements for nearly a decade. The car was carefully excavated by forensic teams who found it in remarkable condition, with Emily's personal belongings still inside. Her NASA identification badge, a half-finished crossword puzzle, and most significantly, her briefcase containing the classified documents she had been carrying the night she disappeared. Inside the briefcase, investigators found Emily's detailed analysis of the satellite data tampering she had discovered, including side-by-side comparisons of original and altered images that clearly showed systematic manipulation of intelligence data over a period of several months. The documents revealed that Emily had identified specific individuals within NASA and the intelligence community who had access to the satellite data processing systems and who could have been responsible for the alterations, though many of the names were written in a code that investigators struggled to decipher. Most shocking of all, the car contained a handwritten note from Emily, apparently written shortly before her disappearance, in which she expressed fear for her life and stated that if anything happened to her, investigators should look into the connections between certain NASA officials and defense contractors who had financial interests in maintaining specific intelligence assessments about Soviet capabilities. The note specifically mentioned Dr. Richard Hawkins, a senior NASA administrator who had oversight of satellite data processing, and suggested that he had been receiving payments from Aerospace Dynamics Corporation, a defense contractor that had been awarded lucrative contracts based on intelligence assessments that Emily believed had been deliberately skewed. Forensic analysis of the car revealed no signs that Emily had been inside when it was buried, leading investigators to conclude that she had been removed from the vehicle before it was hidden, though whether she was alive or dead at that time remained unclear. The discovery of the car behind the same motel where it had originally been found abandoned suggested that whoever was responsible for Emily's disappearance had returned to bury the evidence, possibly years after the initial incident, indicating a level of planning and resource access that pointed to organized criminal activity or government involvement. The FBI immediately reopened the case and launched a new investigation, but many of the original witnesses and suspects had died, retired, or moved away, making it difficult to pursue the leads that Emily's hidden documents had provided. The reopened investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance revealed a complex web of corruption, espionage, and murder that reached the highest levels of NASA and the defense industry, ultimately exposing one of the most significant intelligence scandals of the Cold War era. FBI investigators, led by Special Agent Patricia Williams, used Emily's hidden documents to trace financial connections between NASA officials and Aerospace Dynamics Corporation, discovering a systematic scheme to manipulate satellite intelligence in order to justify increased defense spending and lucrative contracts for advanced weapons systems. The investigation revealed that Dr. Richard Hawkins, whom Emily had identified in her note, had been receiving substantial payments from Aerospace Dynamics through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts, payments that coincided with his decisions to approve altered satellite data that exaggerated Soviet military capabilities. Further investigation showed that the scheme involved at least 6 high-ranking NASA officials and 3 major defense contractors, all working together to ensure that intelligence assessments supported their financial interests, rather than providing accurate information to American policymakers and military planners. The conspiracy had been operating for over 5 years before Emily discovered it, during which time billions of dollars in unnecessary defense contracts had been awarded based on deliberately falsified intelligence about Soviet missile capabilities and strategic intentions. Investigators determined that Emily's discovery of the scheme had posed an existential threat to the conspirators, who stood to lose not only their lucrative contracts, but also faced potential prosecution for treason and fraud if their activities were exposed. The investigation into Emily's actual fate led to the arrest of Marcus Webb, a former CIA operative who had been working as a private security contractor for Aerospace Dynamics, and who had been hired to neutralize the threat posed by Emily's investigation. Under interrogation, Webb confessed to kidnapping Emily from the motel parking lot on the night of her disappearance, but claimed that he had only intended to intimidate her into silence and that her death had been accidental during a struggle. Webb led investigators to a remote location in East Texas, where Emily's remains were finally recovered, bringing closure to her family after 8 years of uncertainty, but also confirming their worst fears about the circumstances of her death. The discovery of Emily's body and Webb's confession provided the evidence needed to prosecute the entire conspiracy, resulting in convictions for 12 individuals, including Dr. Hawkins, and 3 executives from Aerospace Dynamics, with sentences ranging from 15 years to life in prison. The scandal led to major reforms in NASA's security procedures and oversight of classified intelligence operations, as well as congressional hearings that exposed the extent to which defense contractors had been able to manipulate intelligence assessments for financial gain during the Cold War period. The resolution of Emily Carter's case had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond the prosecution of those directly responsible for her death, triggering comprehensive reforms in government oversight of classified intelligence operations and establishing new protections for whistleblowers in sensitive positions. Michael Carter, who had spent 8 years fighting for answers about his wife's fate, became a prominent advocate for families of missing persons and for stronger protections for government employees who discover wrongdoing in their agencies, testifying before Congress about the need for better security for those who risk their lives to expose corruption. Sarah Carter, now 16 and deeply affected by the revelation of how and why her mother had died, channeled her grief into academic achievement and eventually followed in Emily's footsteps by studying aerospace engineering, determined to honor her mother's memory by pursuing a career in space exploration and scientific integrity. NASA established the Emily Carter Memorial Fund for Scientific Integrity, which provides financial support and legal protection for employees who report security breaches, data manipulation, or other forms of misconduct that could compromise national security or scientific accuracy. The fund also sponsors annual conferences on ethics in government science and intelligence work, bringing together researchers, policymakers, and oversight officials to discuss best practices for maintaining integrity in sensitive research environments. Congress passed the Carter Act, which strengthened whistleblower protections for federal employees working on classified projects and established independent oversight mechanisms to investigate allegations of misconduct in intelligence and defense-related research, ensuring that future Emily Carters would have legal recourse and protection when they discovered wrongdoing. The Aerospace Dynamics Corporation was dissolved and its assets seized to pay restitution to the government for the fraudulent contracts it had received, while the defense industry as a whole faced increased scrutiny and oversight to prevent similar schemes from developing in the future. Emily's story became a case study in government ethics courses and intelligence training programs, teaching new generations of public servants about the importance of integrity and the personal risks that sometimes accompany doing the right thing in high-stakes environments. The Starlight Motel, where Emily's car had been found and later buried, was purchased by the Carter family and converted into a memorial center that provides resources and support for families of missing persons, particularly those whose cases involve potential government cover-ups or national security complications. Dr. Morrison, Emily's former supervisor who had supported her investigation, established a scholarship program at MIT for students pursuing careers in aerospace engineering and intelligence analysis, emphasizing the importance of ethical conduct and scientific integrity in all aspects of government service. The case also led to the declassification of thousands of documents related to Cold War intelligence operations, providing historians and researchers with new insights into the extent of corruption and manipulation that had occurred during this critical period in American history. 20 years after the resolution of Emily Carter's case, her legacy continued to influence government policy, scientific ethics, and the protection of whistleblowers across multiple federal agencies, demonstrating how one person's courage and integrity could create lasting positive change even in the face of powerful opposition. The Emily Carter Institute for Government Accountability, established by her family and supported by donations from across the country, had become a leading voice for transparency and ethical conduct in government science, providing legal assistance to hundreds of federal employees who had reported misconduct in their agencies. Sarah Carter, now Dr. Sarah Carter Williams, had completed her doctorate in aerospace engineering and joined NASA as a satellite systems analyst, working in the same building where her mother had made her fateful discovery, but under vastly improved security and oversight procedures that protected employees who reported irregularities. The annual Emily Carter Memorial Lecture at Johnson Space Center had become one of the most prestigious events in the aerospace community, attracting leading scientists, policymakers, and ethicists who discussed the ongoing challenges of maintaining integrity in government research while protecting national security interests. Michael Carter, now in his 70s, continued to serve on the board of the Institute and regularly spoke at conferences about the importance of supporting families affected by government secrecy and the need for continued vigilance in protecting those who risk their careers and lives to expose wrongdoing. The Carter Act had been strengthened several times since its original passage, expanding protections for whistleblowers and creating new mechanisms for investigating allegations of misconduct in classified programs, with over 200 successful cases resolved through its provisions in the 2 decades since Emily's death. NASA had implemented comprehensive reforms in its intelligence operations, including independent oversight of all satellite data processing, mandatory ethics training for all employees with security clearances, and regular audits of contractor relationships to prevent the kind of corruption that had led to Emily's murder. The defense industry had also undergone significant changes, with new regulations requiring transparency in contractor relationships with government agencies and independent verification of intelligence assessments that were used to justify major weapons procurement decisions. Emily's story had been featured in numerous books, documentaries, and academic studies about government accountability and the personal cost of integrity in public service, inspiring new generations of scientists and public servants to prioritize ethical conduct even when it involved personal risk. The Starlight Motel Memorial Center had expanded its services to include counseling, legal assistance, and advocacy for families of missing persons, helping over 1,000 families navigate the complex challenges of cases involving potential government involvement or national security complications. International organizations had also adopted Emily's case as an example of the importance of protecting scientific integrity and government accountability, with several countries implementing similar whistleblower protection laws and oversight mechanisms based on the reforms that had emerged from her tragic death and the subsequent investigation. Today, More than 4 decades after that fateful October evening when Emily Carter left her NASA office for the last time, her story continues to serve as a powerful reminder of the courage required to stand up for truth and integrity in the face of overwhelming opposition and personal danger. Her former office at Johnson Space Center has been preserved as a memorial, displaying her awards, research papers, and personal photographs alongside exhibits about the importance of scientific integrity and the ongoing need to protect those who risk everything to expose wrongdoing in government agencies. The Emily Carter Institute has grown into an international organization with offices in 12 countries, providing support and protection for government whistleblowers around the world and advocating for stronger transparency laws and oversight mechanisms in democratic societies everywhere. Sarah Carter Williams, now a senior NASA administrator responsible for satellite intelligence operations, has implemented additional reforms that ensure no single individual can alter intelligence data without independent verification, creating multiple layers of oversight that would have prevented the kind of manipulation her mother discovered. Michael Carter, despite his advanced age, continues to travel the country speaking about Emily's legacy and the importance of supporting those who choose integrity over personal safety, his presentations drawing standing ovations from audiences who recognize the ongoing relevance of his wife's sacrifice. The annual Emily Carter Award for Scientific Integrity has become one of the most prestigious honors in government service, recognizing federal employees who have demonstrated exceptional courage in reporting misconduct or maintaining ethical standards under pressure, with recipients receiving not only recognition, but also ongoing protection and support. NASA's current satellite intelligence operations are considered among the most transparent and accountable in the world, with regular public reports on oversight activities and a zero-tolerance policy for any form of data manipulation or contractor influence that could compromise the integrity of intelligence assessments. The defense industry continues to operate under the enhanced oversight and transparency requirements that emerged from Emily's case, with independent auditors regularly reviewing contractor relationships and intelligence assessments to ensure that financial interests do not compromise national security decision-making. Emily's story has been translated into dozens of languages and is taught in universities and government training programs worldwide as an example of the personal cost of integrity and the importance of protecting those who choose to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. The memorial garden at the former Starlight Motel site has become a place of pilgrimage for families of missing persons and advocates for government accountability, with visitors from around the world coming to pay their respects to a woman who paid the ultimate price for her commitment to truth and justice. Her legacy lives on in every government employee who chooses to report wrongdoing despite personal risk, in every oversight mechanism that protects scientific integrity, and in every family that finds support and advocacy through the institutions that bear her name, proving that even in death, Emily Carter's commitment to truth continues to make the world a safer and more honest place for future generations.